Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive.
Yeah.
We're going to be wading into some really fascinating territory today, I think. True humility.
Okay.
And you sent this piece in from thickshades.com.
Right.
And right off the bat, the title is interesting. On true humility and the danger of... But here's the kicker. It ends in .wav, like the audio format.
It does make you wonder, a .wav file, it suggests a recording, some voice, like frozen in time.
Right.
Makes you wonder if we're about to uncover like a hidden sermon or maybe a passionate speech, all about like the nature of humility.
It's like we've stumbled onto a time capsule or something.
Right.
And speaking of things that stand the test of time, this piece dives right into this age-old issue of people kind of masking their actions with spiritual justifications. And it feels incredibly relevant even today.
Yeah, I mean, what's so fascinating to me is just how deeply human this urge is to sort of present ourselves in a positive light.
Mm-hmm.
But this text, it challenges us to really examine our motivations. Are we acting from this place of genuine humility? Or are we, like, more concerned we're just appearing virtuous, you know?
It makes you wonder, is all self-promotion bad? Because this text brings up Proverbs 27.2. Let another man praise thee, and not thine own mouth. Now, on the surface, that seems like a clear call against, like, any self-promotion.
Totally, yeah. It's about letting your actions speak for themselves. But I feel like there's some subtlety here.
Okay.
Because, I mean, there's a difference between, like, you know, confidently sharing your accomplishments to maybe inspire others versus, you know, blatantly seeking praise just for your own personal gain.
That's a really interesting distinction. So maybe it's not about like eradicating all self-promotion, but rather being honest with ourselves about the why behind it, you know?
Exactly, yeah. It's about like dissecting our motives.
Yeah.
Are we seeking validation to kind of inflate our own egos? Or are we promoting ourselves in service of something larger than ourselves?
And that takes us right to the heart of what this text calls spiritual justification, which is kind of like hiding behind faith or good intentions instead of just being upfront about our true desires.
Yeah, it's almost like the text is urging us to ask this question, like, if we were to strip away all of the spiritual language, what would our motives actually reveal?
Okay, so let's unpack that with a specific example. The text points to the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector from Luke. Quick recap. Pharisee's boasting about his piety. The tax collector humbly acknowledges his faults. And of course, it's the tax collector that earns God's favor.
Yeah, I mean, that parable is so powerful because it really highlights that difference between, like, outward displays of piety and genuine humility.
Yeah.
You know, it's like in today's world, especially with the social media, it often becomes a stage for what people call virtue signaling, right?
Oh, yeah.
Publicly proclaiming your own righteousness, sometimes I think for the sole purpose of gaining like social currency.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
It makes you wonder, are we like truly acting from a pure heart? Or are we more concerned with just like curating this virtuous image?
It's like this text is holding up a mirror to modern day life, especially in this age of like online personas and curated feeds and all
Right.
that. It makes you wonder, where do we draw the line between authentically advocating for what we believe in and simply seeking validation for being on the right side of an issue?
It's such a delicate balance, isn't it?
It is.
Because on the one hand, it's important to speak out against injustice, you know, and stand up for what you believe in. But on the other hand, this text seems to caution against letting that desire for recognition kind of overshadow the purity of your intentions.
Our internal battle, like, are we truly in it for the cause, or are we driven by a desire to be seen as a good person?
Right, exactly. And that is exactly where I think true humility comes in. And it's not about shrinking back. You know, it's not about staying silent, but it's about approaching these situations with a quiet confidence. You're letting your actions speak louder than any self-proclaimed virtue.
Okay, so how do we even begin to, like, untangle this? Because it feels like we're being encouraged to both speak our truths and remain humble about it.
It's a nuanced dance for sure.
It is, yeah.
And it requires a lot of self-awareness, I think. But I mean, the text does offer some guidance. For example, it brings up James 4.6. God resisteth the proud, but giveth grace unto the humble.
That's such a powerful reminder. It's like, even when we feel totally justified in our self-righteousness, maybe, just maybe, a little dose of humility is actually what's needed.
Precisely. And this brings us to, I think, a really crucial question. How do we actually cultivate that sense of humility?
Yeah.
Especially in a world that often seems to reward self-promotion.
Right.
What the text seems to suggest is that true humility isn't about seeking that external validation,
Right.
but rather, finding this quiet confidence in the integrity of your own actions.
It's about that inner knowing that you're living in alignment with your values, even when nobody's watching, nobody's applauding.
Yeah.
And that actually connects beautifully with how the text shifts gears towards the end. It introduces this poem about the nature of true humility.
Okay.
And yeah, I think it'd be really interesting to dive into the specific language of this poem, see what we can uncover.
Yeah, let's do it. So the poem, it opens with these lines. No need to shout from mountain heights will claim my cause in an endless fight.
Wow.
It's a powerful image, isn't it?
It is.
It suggests that, true humility, it doesn't need a megaphone,
It's like those who are constantly seeking validation are actually betraying a lack of inner confidence. It's like they need that external affirmation to convince themselves that they're on the right path.
Totally. Yeah, it reminds me of this quote. I don't know where I heard it, but it's like, the louder he talked of his honor, the faster we counted our spoons. Sometimes the people who feel the need to constantly assert their own righteousness, they're the ones who are actually the most insecure.
Ooh, I like that quote. And the poem kind of echoes this sentiment, I think, when it says, the humble heart in silence rests, not seeking praise, no worldly tests. There's a quiet strength that comes from within, like a certainty that doesn't require external validation.
It's about finding that peace in the alignment of your actions and your values. It's not about seeking approval or winning arguments. It's about that inner knowing that you're living your truth.
And that's where I think the .wav file format of this original source is so interesting, because it's like we're listening to someone wrestle with these ideas in real time,
Yeah, it's like eavesdropping on somebody's internal dialogue almost.
Yeah.
And the poem, it feels like it's tapping into that inner struggle.
Totally.
And urging us to quiet the noise of the outside world so we can listen to that still small voice within.
Because when we quiet the external noise, that's when we can actually start to hear our own authentic voice.
Right.
And that's where true humility takes root. And again, it's not about denying our accomplishments or shrinking back from our beliefs, but it's approaching the world with this quiet confidence and a willingness to just let our actions speak for themselves.
It's about recognizing that we're all flawed. We're all imperfect beings, capable of great good, but also capable of great harm. And I think humility allows us to navigate the world with a sense of grace and compassion, both for ourselves and for others.
It's about acknowledging that we don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
And that sometimes the most courageous act is to admit when we're wrong.
Exactly. And this brings us, I think, to a really crucial point, this text's contemporary relevance.
Okay.
In today's world, which is so saturated with social media, this culture of self-promotion,
Right.
it's so easy to get caught up in that cycle of, seeking validation, justifying our actions online.
Like everyone's trying to prove they're on the right side of history all the time.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's almost as if our online personas have become these extensions of our egos.
Oh, totally.
And we feel this constant pressure to defend them, even when it means sacrificing our own integrity or engaging in really harmful behavior.
It's like we've become so accustomed to curating this certain image online that we forget who we even are offline.
Right. And that's where I think this text message is so important, because it's reminding us that true humility isn't about how we present ourselves to the world.
Yeah.
It's about the integrity of our actions. It's about that quiet confidence that comes from knowing that we're living in alignment with our values.
It's about recognizing that true fulfillment doesn't come from likes and shares.
Right.
But it comes from that deep inner sense of knowing that you're living a life that actually matters. And that's not to say that social media is inherently bad. It's a tool. And like any tool, it can be used for good or for evil.
Exactly. Yeah, it's all about how we used it. If we're using it to promote ourselves at the expense of others, that's when I think we run into trouble. But if we're using it to, amplify marginalized voices or connect with people who share our values, to inspire and to uplift, then it can be such a powerful force for good.
I love that perspective. It's about recognizing that potential for both harm and good in all aspects of our lives.
Yeah.
And making conscious choices that align with our values.
And that's a great segue, I think, into the text's concluding thought.
Okay.
It's almost like it's challenging us to consider what kind of impact we actually want to have on the world. Do we want to be known for our, loud proclamations and our self-righteousness? Or do we want our actions to speak for themselves? Quietly, but powerfully.
Because ultimately, it's not about being perfect, but it's about striving to be better, both for ourselves and for the world around us. Because it strikes me that true humility isn't about, diminishing our own light, but rather recognizing that we all shine brighter when we're lifting others up.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way of putting it.
Yeah.
And I think it ties really well into the poem's final lines. In secret fields where deeds are sown, his love will reap when none have known.
Yeah.
Like, it's a reminder that the most profound impact often happens, quietly,
Mhm.
without fanfare,
Yeah.
without all the recognition.
Yeah. It's like that old saying, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now.
Right.
True humility is kind of about just showing up, doing the work, even when no one is watching.
Because it's those small actions, those consistent actions, ones that are driven by like a genuine desire to make a difference. Those are the ones that ultimately create the most lasting change. And I think that's what this whole text, is calling us to do, to cultivate that inner humility, that quiet confidence, and then to let it guide our actions out in the world.
It's about, focusing less on appearing virtuous and more on simply living our values in a way that feels authentic, true to ourselves.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we're all works in progress, always striving to be better, to do better. And humility, that allows us to embrace that journey
Yeah.
with grace, compassion, and a healthy dose of self-awareness.
And that's a powerful message, especially these days. So as we wrap up this deep dive into true humility versus self-justification, what's like the one question you hope our listener walks away pondering?
Oh, that's a good question. For me, it all kind of boils down to this. How can we move through the world, with that quiet confidence in our values and let our actions speak louder than, any self-proclaimed virtue?
It's a question worth wrestling with because it's in those quiet moments, the self-reflection. When we're honest with ourselves about our motivations, that's when we truly begin to understand the power of humility. And listener, we hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought. Thank you for joining us on this exploration. Until next time, keep seeking those nuggets of wisdom that make life so fascinating.